Hello on this happy snowy day. Welcome to PCAP's Native Prairie Speaker Series. My name is Caitlin Rose Seiler, and I am the Stewardship Coordinator for Saskatchewan Prairie Conservation Action Plan, or PCAP. Today, Julia Adamson, Chair from Friends of the Saskatoon Afforestation Areas, will be speaking about City Nature Challenge Saskatoon and Area, sorting out noxious invasives from beneficial pollinator species. I'd like to start by stating we respectfully acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories of many Indigenous nations and communities, past and present. For millennia, they have worked to protect these landscapes and the life these areas sustain. I would like to thank these original caretakers and acknowledge the ongoing work and presence of Indigenous peoples in Canada today. Before we begin, I'd like to note that PCAP's Native Prairie Speaker Series is a monthly presentation about anything to do with native prairie conservation or species at risk. Join us on May 3rd for a webinar about timing agricultural activities based on when bobolink finish breeding by Julia Putt of Grasslands National Park. You can register for this webinar and other Native Prairie Speaker Series webinars on the PCAP website, and all past webinar presentations can be found on the PCAP YouTube channel, and this webinar will be uploaded there in the near future. That's www.youtube.com/user/skpcap. And a reminder to all of our listeners out there, if you have any questions during the presentation, just type it into the questions section of the webinar dashboard at any time during the presentation. And if you're using an app on a cell phone, you can send your question by chat to the organizer, and questions will be answered towards the end of the webinar. I'd like to take a moment to note that financial support for today's webinar is provided by our presenting sponsors, Canadian Forage and Grasslands Association, Eco-Friendly Sask, Enbridge, Information Services Corporation, Saskatchewan Cattlemen's Association, SaskTel, and Wildlife Habitat Canada. In-kind support has been provided by the Friends of the Saskatoon Afforestation Areas. So without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce today's presenter. Julia Adamson is the chair of the Friends of Saskatoon Afforestation Areas, Inc., a researcher and writer with an education in engineering who has been helping to document the environment and status of 474 acres of urban forest at Richard St. Barb Baker Afforestation Area and George Jeanneroux Urban Regional Park in Saskatoon. Both of these local parks were formed at the same time as Cranberry Flats and Chief Whitecap Park, and yet the afforestation areas have remained Saskatoon's best kept secrets. Through citizen science fieldwork on iNaturalist and eBird, noxious invasives have been identified and removed, and over 20 species at risk have been identified in these semi-wilderness habitats. This is a great segue to celebrate the United Nations 2021 to 2030 United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, and take action to support the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 11 Sustainable Cities and Communities, UN SDG 15 Life on Land, and the UN SDG 13 Climate Action. Since 2015, the Friends of Saskatoon Afforestation Areas have been working with the City of Saskatoon and Meewasin for best practices, and iNaturalist is a great tool. We would love to encourage everyone to talk about trees, forests, and preserving our native species in Saskatchewan. So with that, I'm pleased to pass it over to Julia.
Thank you, Caitlin. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, perfect.
Thank you kindly. Thank you for the introduction. And our presentation will be City Nature Challenge Saskatoon and Area, sorting out the noxious invasives from beneficial native pollinator species. The afforestation areas are situated in the West Swale, York Island Glacial Spillway, a sacred site in Treaty 6 territory and homeland of the Métis. Those who entered into Treaty 6 are the Nahiawak, Cree, Nakaway, Saulteaux, and Yankton and Yankatoni Nakota people. May our relationships with the land, standing peoples, forests, and waters teach us to honor and respect the past and invite us to move forward in harmony. May we all come together as friends to find inspiration and guidance from histories, languages, and cultures which broaden our understanding and community collaboration for the present. So a little bit about the City Nature Challenge. This is the first year that the City of Saskatoon and Area has been involved. It's easy to do. You just download the iNaturalist app, which is free, onto your smartphone to take photos of plants, animals, insects, or mushrooms, or any living organism, And the BioBlitz dates are between April 29th and May 2nd. Of course, you can use iNaturalist at any time, but this particular endeavor for the City Nature Challenge takes place in that 4-day window. And Saskatoon will compete with other cities, over 400 around the world, for the title of the most biodiverse city, and we need your help. The goals are to engage everyone in the collection of biodiversity data with 3 awards each year for the cities and areas that make the most observations, find the most species, and engage the most people. Here's a great opportunity for you to get connected to nature while taking part in an international event designed to track biodiversity. The City Nature Challenge is an annual event run by the community science teams at the California Academy of Sciences and the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County. The Canadian Wildlife Federation hosts the Canada-wide City Nature Challenge, and the Friends of the Saskatoon Afforestation Areas took on the Saskatoon and Area City Nature Challenge. The City Nature Challenge is a fun, simple, and family-friendly event, a wonderful way to get local area residents involved in a citizen science event that contributes to an international database of biodiversity. So as we look at living organisms around us, we see that there are some that are introduced as an exotic or a cultivated species and brought in by human means. Then we have those that are native species surviving in the ecosystem or environment naturally without human intervention. An invasive species is when the introduced species takes over and outcompetes the native species. And then we have documentation about our species at risk. And any naturally occurring species in danger of disappearing totally, becoming extinct, extirpated in an area, whether it's endangered or threatened, are monitored for our native species, and some of them, thankfully, are not at risk. A cosmopolitan species is one that is sighted everywhere around the world, such as humans and houseflies. An endemic species, on the other hand, needs a particular environment, particular parameters for its existence. So the solution in trying to sort out our various organisms across Saskatchewan is to use the help of iNaturalist. So all you have to do is download the iNaturalist free app to your smartphone and take a picture of any living organism. It's very easy to use. It's just like using the camera on your phone. You snap it, you upload it, and then the identification process begins. And you can get used to and learn about the power of image recognition technology to identify the plants and animals and organisms all around you. The other thing iNaturalist does is, besides having the artificial intelligence embedded into the iNaturalist app, it's a great way to network with specialist scientists from around the world. You can do so whether you're an observer on iNaturalist, taking pictures or recording sounds on iNaturalist, or you can become an identifier on iNaturalist, and that is a way to increase your interaction with specialist scientists. So here we have an image of the creeping thistle, and this white square is how it would turn out your observation on iNaturalist after it's been identified to research grade. When you see this red exclamation mark and you click on it, you will see this screen coming up saying that it has been introduced to the area by human means. You can also go to the Saskatchewan Conservation Data Center and download a species list. They come in Excel format or PDF format, and the SCDC species list ranks this particular organism as SNA, which means that a conservation status is not applicable to this species, and it has been determined to be coming to the area by human means. And for that reason, the SCDC will not be tracking this particular species. Richard St. Barbaker, a global conservationist, said it this way: the world's problem is not a population explosion, but an animal explosion. We've got to decide whether we're going to feed animals or humans. To feed animals is a roundabout way of getting food. It takes 18 times more land to feed people on beef than on vegetables, nuts, fruits, or grains. Now here we have the iNaturalist image of a dwarf thistle, an observation that was submitted, and here we have an icon VU, which from NatureServe, the curators have mentioned that it's a vulnerable species ranked as S3 in Saskatchewan, and downloading the species list from the SCDC also lists this plant as S3. And in this case, yes, the SCDC is tracking the dwarf thistle. The Committee on the Status of Pollinators in North America found that the non-target effects of agricultural pesticides numbered among the possible causes for wild pollinator decline, creating a pollinator crisis, along with loss of habitat, competition from invasive species, and introduced diseases. Now on this page, we see that this is the iNaturalist page for Floodman's thistle. Someone uploaded an observation, and in this case, the observer took several pictures of the organism, which we can see here. It made it to research grade from the identifiers. It needs to have 2/3 consensus for the species level to be showing. And here we do not see any icons at all. This one was not introduced, nor is it a species at risk. And when we check it out with the SCDC species list, we see that it is ranked S4. And so therefore it seems to be fairly secure to the area. And in this case, then the SCDC is not tracking it because it's not a species at risk. The transformation of biodiverse farm fields, forests, or meadows into fields of a single crop or monocrop, these are like food forests for pollinators. Claire Creeman, professor of zoology, a conservation biologist, and recipient of the 2020 Volvo Environmental Prize, explained. And these food deserts leave the insects struggling to find enough food. BC's blueberry farms are an example. Rows upon rows of blueberry bushes all need to be pollinated when they bloom in the spring, a Herculean task which is thought of for native pollinators. So they are helped out with hives of domesticated honeybees that farmers rent to ensure their crops are pollinators. But that pollen feast is quickly over, leaving native pollinators with almost nothing to eat for months and making it very difficult for them to survive. This was reported by The Star in an interview with Claire Creeman. So on this page, we see some very similar species. There are thistles of Saskatchewan. We have a couple pictures, the inflorescence or blossom of the creeping thistle along with the leaves. Then we move on to the bull thistle, Floodman's thistle, the musk, or the nodding thistle. They are mostly invasive species, and we can see here that they have been introduced to the region. The Floodman's thistle, however, is native. On this page, we see images of dwarf thistle, swamp, Floodman's, and wavy leaf thistle. And once again, we see how very much similar these are one from the other. And here we see that none of these ones are invasive, and all of them are native pollinator species in need of our protection. So here we have some mystery thistles, once again looking very similar to one another. A baseline monitoring program, such as the data collection provided by iNaturalist, is needed to increase knowledge about the status of wild pollinators. Such programs benefit from citizen science collection programs. This is even more imperative given the recent extinctions of species such as bees and Lepidoptera pollinating species. The recommendation followed that pollinator-friendly land management practices, providing corridors such as power lines, road, pipeline right-of-ways, and setting aside land to provide nesting habitat and pollinator fields in fields is very handy. Berkeley conservation biologist Claire Creeman says it this way: current rates of extinction far exceed those of past major extinction spasms, largely due to human influence. Through resource consumption and land use, humans now dominate all global environmental systems. When we create this diversified farming system, what we're doing is creating conditions that generate and regenerate these pollinating services in the farming system itself. And for that reason, we then don't need to bring honeybees around by the millions. We don't need to rely on a single species such as the European bumblebee. Our native pollinators are our insurance policy that provides our pollination services. So if we reveal what all these species might be, we see we have a native species of Floodman's thistle. Then we go into a couple of images of the creeping or the Canada thistle, a couple images of Musk Thistle. Then we have the field South Thistle, which is even of a different genus, noxious instead of Circesium. And then we have a couple images of wavy leaf thistle. The Xerces Society says that our native thistles are disappearing. Our native thistles have value for our pollinators, our native pollinators, where the Canada thistle does not even need pollinators. It can spread by self-pollination, seed, and root system. The other invasive species, Musk Thistle, is a biennial who also completes its life cycle in 1 year, and it produces huge numbers of seeds by self-pollination. So human intervention is really needed to protect our native species in Saskatchewan. And here we see that these ones here are invasive and these ones are S4, and they're ranked as native. So just going into the Saskatchewan Conservation Data Center ranking a little bit more, we see that if it's ranked as S1 or S2, it's very close to the extinct or extirpation side. And if it's ranked as S4 or S5, it's rather secure, rather abundant maybe, and of a low threat level. And these ones need our help because they're at a very high threat level. And they also are at a very rare rate. You might not see them as much. So it's very cool to pay attention to the rankings either on iNaturalist or through the Saskatchewan Conservation Data Center. So this is a page on iNaturalist. If you clicked on Creeping Thistle or Canada Thistle, you can see that there are several features that can be found on iNaturalist. There is a map which shows the range of observations taken by observers on iNaturalist already. The About page tells a little bit more about the species or the organism. Taxonomy and status are exactly that. And here we've clicked on the similar species page. And so we can see that through iNaturalist, they have discovered that these species here are quite commonly mistaken for the Canada or the creeping thistle. So whenever you're out in the field and you actually want to check your observation, and if you haven't gone into the taxonomic key, you can see which species might be similar to the one you think it might be. On this page, we have clicked on the taxonomy for the Canada thistle. And if you're using iNaturalist for any organism and you would like to bring along a specialist scientist, it's a good idea not to go right to the species level and rather put in even something as basic as plant or flowering plants is fine. If the iNaturalist computer vision comes up with a suggestion of thistles and allies or thistles and burdocks, and you think it probably is a thistle, you can probably pick that and then leave the species identification for the community of specialists if you're actually trying to determine if it's a native or an invasive species. And it can be for other organisms and not just, we're just started out with the thistles as an example. Now, this is an example of how the computer vision image recognition technology works. There are two systems on iNaturalist, both crowdsourced and the computer vision. And when you put up this organism into iNaturalist and click on what is it, iNaturalist will come up that we're pretty sure that it's in this genus, and we see that iNaturalist has picked thistle or genus Circesium for both of these examples. It also provides some species level identifications. And then this view is a link that you can click on to get more information, and it actually brings up pictures of that organism for you to compare your image to. But if you're not exactly positive which species to pick from the list, or if you think it might be another species, then it's quite all right to stay on the safe side and just leave it as genus. And if you're not even sure it's a thistle, it's okay to just, as we said before, say plants or flowering plants. Ecologist Taylor Ricketts, Gund professor and director of the Gund Institute of Environment at the University of Vermont, notes that diversified farming systems provide natural habitats of floral resources and nesting sites, providing benefits for crop pollination from the halo effect services due to the foraging ranges of the native pollinator species. These natural habitat fragments can easily come from road allowances, power line, gas line right-of-ways combined with agricultural red zones undertaken in the ecological assessment undertaken by each agricultural producer. If there is an underproducing area of land losing money, rather than tilling it and trying to force it to produce, set that area to native and natural habitat cover. Also utilizing right-of-ways as pollinator ribbons in conjunction with producer land management strategies for native land cover restoration are steps to allow pollinator populations to persist into the future. Using citizen science like iNaturalist to understand the habitat also increases understanding of the community composition in regions across North America, a crucial step to developing plans to manage for the very survival of our native pollinator species. Now here we see how iNaturalist goes into the crowdsourced species identification system. So the observer has taken a picture of this caterpillar out in the field, and their identification figured that this caterpillar might grow up to be a butterfly or a moth in the order Lepidoptera. Another identifier came along, and with this icon, we see that they have agreed with the computer vision technology suggestion, and they clicked on the view symbol and compared it to what is already on iNaturalist. Then two other specialist scientists came around, and they brought this organism that was an observation a little bit closer to genus and species level. Now, the interesting thing is if you click on these icons for these identifiers, you can actually go to their profile page on iNaturalist and read a little bit about what they put in for their biography. Plant species show reduced fruit and seed set due to the decline of pollinators. A recommendation for natural resource protection needs discovery and data collection, such as that provided by citizen science using the free iNaturalist app. Rare plant species and pollinator decline would be less vulnerable to the extinction vortex. Claire Creeman, conservation biologist specializing in pollination, agroecology, and entomology, says about 1/3 of the food that we eat by weight depends on an animal pollinator visiting to produce that food or that vegetable or that seed. In other words, you can thank a pollinator for about 1 out of every 3 mouthfuls that you take each day. Now we're going to talk a little bit about iNaturalist photos and the observations. When you're an observer in the field, it's a good idea to take lots of pictures of the organism if it's possible. For instance, if you're standing at a single flower plant, then you can take a picture of the top and the bottom of the flower fairly easily, the top and the bottom of the leaf, the stem, and the entire plant and the habitat in which it grows. Now that might be a little bit more complicated when you see a bird flying by or an insect, and sometimes the insects will stick around if they're eating, but other times they might scurry away. But where possible, take as many photos of the same organism as possible. iNaturalist artificial intelligence is tested. Whenever the crowdsourced identification agrees with the 2/3 consensus, then the species level goes to the Global Information Facility, GBIF, and it's what the artificial intelligence uses to compare your photo of your organism with. The artificial intelligence is also so refined that it can use the maps and species seen nearby. So if you're out in the field, you might even see that the suggestions for the species level is this, and seen nearby for a similar species are these suggestions. And again, you can click on view, and your organism picture and the iNaturalist photos online are up on the screen at the same time, so you can make a visual comparison. And the map distribution very much helps. When you're on the computer, you can actually sign in to iNaturalist.ca by using the settings, and in that way the species recommendations narrow it down, and iNaturalist won't be trying to compare your observation including species from Africa or Europe or something like that. They will use what has been seen locally. iNaturalist is a wonderful tool to provide phenological data. It shows the morphology and seasonal stages. So every once in a while, if you've got a field guide, it might show a flower and show the blossom and not the entire habitat or the plant. Or if it's a book on butterflies, it might show the adult stage. Whereas when you're on iNaturalist, you have observers taking pictures at many different stages or the morphology. So for insects, you would see the larval and the adult stage. For plants, you'd see the emergent, flowering, and seeding stage. as well as on iNaturalist, you might see signs of life. So you might see feathers, nests, scat, tracks, shells, fur, and webs, and all these can be uploaded to iNaturalist for identification as to what organism they are showing evidence of. iNaturalist is authentic and it helps scientific data collection and specialists the world over, and we'll go into that a bit more later. It's a backyard safari, it's a park space exploration of wonder, and it's the insects and plants at the end of a dirt road, and it's the curiosity to explore the crevices of a bus stop or the crevices of a fence post. Now here we see why it's important to take many pictures of the same organism. We have delightful wild roses blooming in June in Saskatchewan, and we have the prickly wild rose, woods, and prairie rose. And all of our roses are delightful pink flowers with 5 petals to them. And if you just take a picture of the beautiful blossom, it doesn't help identifiers determine which exact species of rose it might be. But if the observer did take a picture of the stem of the rose, here we see that the prickly rose is extremely prickly on the stem, and woods rose, the most common species in Saskatchewan, has these broad, flattened bases at the bottom of its prickles. And that's how you can tell a woods rose apart from a prickly rose. And the prairie rose, its stem is really, really hard to see because the actual plant is so low to the ground. The other way to tell our different rose species apart is later on in the season when the rose hips form. The rose hips are a little bit different between all these species. So that is one reason to take different pictures of the same organism while you're out in the field, because you don't know which is going to be the characteristic in the taxonomic key that brings it to species level. If you just upload the flower of the rose, then it will probably stay at genus Rosa. So what are the benefits of iNaturalist? They're areas for community connections with naturalists and specialist scientists around the world. They're great for documenting aberrance in species, differences between members of the same species, an indicator of climate change affecting the ecosystem, and it also is a great way to easily detect invasive species first coming into the area. It's a great way to discover a range expansion or a range contraction of a species. It can detect a species previously thought to be extirpated or extinct, and when those come up on iNaturalist, they usually make a scientific journal entry. It's a great tool for collection of photos in a curation. And it's a flexible approach to learning about the natural world outside of a textbook. And it's a wonderful way to understand nature better. Sir David Attenborough, a broadcaster and natural historian, says, "It's surely our responsibility to do everything within our power to create a planet that provides a home, not just for us, but for all life on Earth." Now here we have a slide of the hawksbird. We have a slender hawksbird, the narrow-leafed hawksbird, and a false dandelion, and they are all a very similar species. When we look into them a little bit more, the narrow-leafed hawksbird has been introduced to the area, and it's actually designated a nuisance weed species under the Weed Control Act. But the very sad thing is that this species looks very similar to this species, and it's a species at risk. This species has also been mistaken for the narrow-leafed hawksbird, and there's a few others if you use that page on iNaturalist. So sometimes, if you think that you have a nuisance weed species, it's good to just double check on iNaturalist to make sure you're not bringing into extirpation a native species at risk, and therefore bringing into extirpation a native pollinator species that relies on that native plant. According to Claire Creeman, a conservation biologist, there are 2 conservation strategies, and both are needed. In the protected area strategy, the goal is to conserve as many species as efficiently as possible within a network of reserves. While such protected areas may also provide services to humanity, the main impetus for their creation is the intrinsic value of the biodiversity they contain. In the ecosystem service model, the goal is to identify and conserve the species that provide important benefits to humans in the places where these species are the most needed. Now here we have a slide of the bumblebee and the honeybee. We see we have the Suckley's cuckoo bumblebee, northern amber bumblebee, the western bumblebee, and the western honeybee. Every single extinction event cannot be reversed. There is a lot at stake. Our decision made this minute impact today and tomorrow. During this United Nations decade on ecosystem restoration, we must restore the habitats we can for conservation. There is no time like the present. Almost everywhere in the world, man has been disregarding the divine law and the laws of nature to his own undoing. In his pride, he has rampaged over the stage of the earth, forgetting that he is only one of the players put there to play his part in harmony and oneness with all living things. That was a quote from Richard St. Barbaker from The Divine Law and the Laws of Nature. So if we delve a little bit more into these particular organisms, we see that all of these bumblebees here are a species at risk, whereas the honeybee here has been introduced by human means. The Committee on the Status of Pollinators in North America noted that a cause of decline in native pollinators appears to be a result of the spillover of diseases from managed diseases susceptible to high pathogen loads. Speaking to imported European honeybees and native pollinators, Claire Creeman's research shows that wild bees can make a real difference to the future of food. In the first place, wild bees can substitute for honeybees. They can provide the pollination services that we need. And formerly, they did provide all the pollination services that we needed. There are still places in the world where wild bee communities are providing those pollination services on crop fields. A second way is that sometimes wild bees can pollinate certain crops much better than honeybees can. That's according to an Earth Sky report. So here we have some Saskatchewan Lepidoptera, species at risk. We have the Dakota skipper, the juniper hairstreak, the small checkered skipper, and the simious roadside skipper. And as we see, they are all listed as S1. The Saskatchewan Conservation Data Center mentions that there are 26 Lepidoptera species at risk, ranked as S1, and 23 Lepidoptera species ranked as S2 in Saskatchewan. According to the Science and Endangered Species Act, habitat is one of the 4 components of a species environment, along with climate variables, nutrients, and other interacting organisms. The fact that habitat serves a multitude of organisms is critical to understanding its full role in the Endangered Species Act. Many species have not been classified, nor their status determined. Our knowledge of species is too limited, and the species deserving of endangered or threatened status is also too numerous to list all that might merit it in a time frame adequate to protect them. The number of unclassified living species is thought to be from 2 to 10 times the number that have been identified and named. So if we were to take the known 26 Lepidoptera species at risk ranked as S1 and multiply it to 10, we would end up with 260 species at risk and 230 species at risk ranked as S2, just because we don't have enough information. A program like iNaturalist and an increase in observers definitely helps our insect population. So here we have iNaturalist to the rescue. Mycologists pay more attention to those little brown mushrooms belonging to the agaric species and the big white mushrooms. Botanists look out for those darn yellow composites of the aster family with some 25,000 species, and ornithologists and bird lovers know to pay particular attention to those little brown jobs. Teams of experts will be reviewing and updating the information that's submitted. So after you're an observer in the field, you can log back in later and learn more about what you have spotted. So here we have our dandelion in Saskatchewan. We have the common dandelion, the red-seeded dandelion, and the horned or fleshy dandelion. Questions to consider are there spiny edges on the leaves? Are there no leaves at all on the stems? Is it growing in a very small grouping? Did you find it in a muskeg area, on a rocky slope, in a drying meadow, in a thicket, or in the open woods? Does the fruit have bumps on it? And are there 3 rows to the bracts? These are the bracts on the underside of the flower. And so if there's 3 rows to them, that's one of the characteristics in the taxonomic key for identifying this species at risk. And does the inner row have black tips with an appendage that looks like a horn? This one right here. And are the seeds or the achines olive to brown, as in the common dandelion? Are they red-seeded, as in the red-seeded dandelion? Or are the seeds brown to gray, olive or black, ribbed with bumps or tubercles present? Because if they're very bumpy seeds, then it could be the horned or the fleshy dandelion, a species at risk. So here's another taxonomic key for our dandelions in Saskatchewan. The common dandelion has a very large lobe at the end of the leaf, and the rest of the leaf is rather shallowly lobed, whereas the red-seeded dandelion has seeds where the leaves are divided almost all the way to the center, and the end terminal segments are very, very small in comparison to the common dandelion. For the horned dandelion or the fleshy dandelion, the other indicators, species for the characteristics on the taxonomic key work very well that we've mentioned already. And that's how to determine which of our dandelions are a species at risk in Saskatchewan. According to a newsletter called The Great Lakes Now, they have reported that the native milfoil, thought to be extirpated from Ohio for 2 decades, is in the process of identification, according to a March newsletter, and is just awaiting the blooming stage to make a positive identification. The invasive species, which is the Eurasian water milfoil, spreads across the surface of the water, blocks the sunlight, and is a threat to native plants, whereas the native milfoil enriches water quality, provides much needed oxygen for aquatic species, and for biodiversity. We're going to go into our water milfoils a bit more. In Saskatchewan, we have 4 species. We have 2 water milfoil species at risk, and a couple that are a little bit more secure in our environment. One thing to remember if you're taking a picture for iNaturalist of the water milfoil to determine which one you have is that the Eurasian water milfoil has a flat end to its leaf, whereas the Siberian or American water milfoil is rounded at the ends of its leaves. And this one has many, many branches rather closely spaced together, and this one is shorter, and they're a little bit more wider apart for the spacing. And the other thing is, when you take it out of the water, this one, the native species, rather holds its shape. And when you take the invasive species out of the water, it collapses like this. So those are a few extra things to remember when you're trying to determine if the water milfoil is an invasive species or a native species. And then you can also go on the map ranges on iNaturalist to see where they have been discovered. And even though that article was talking about a United States discovery of native milfoil, we can see that the invasive milfoil is in Canada already and getting very close to our wetlands. So here we have a picture of some various different kinds of pollinators. We have native species. We have this beautiful woolly-tailed marsh fly that's pretending to be a bee for protection purposes. And we have a western yellow jacket, ranked as S2. And then we have the western honeybee, which is an introduced species, which is coming into different types of colony collapses. And one of them is the European foul breed disease. So how can we possibly help? There are several scientific articles about pollinators. here we have a picture of the milkweeds of Saskatchewan. We have quite a few in Saskatchewan. And here we have the Selkie milkweed, the green antelope horn, the world milkweed, the showing milkweed, and the olive leaf milkweed. This one here is the one you usually find in the store to buy. It's the tropical milkweed, and it's actually native to South America. It actually also needs starting inside because South America has a much different growing habitat than North America. The Monarch Butterfly does need a milkweed to lay its eggs on. The actual adult Monarch Butterfly can survive on other species. However, the eggs need to be laid on a milkweed plant. And if you go to the Native Plant Society of Saskatchewan, you can see that there are native plant material and services supplier list right on their website. And so you can ensure that you receive a native milkweed to help support our monarch butterflies. Monarch butterflies do have a range to make a butterfly pathway. And so the more people that can be planting some kind of milkweed, even if it is somebody in their yard in town or in a city or in a right-of-way, that helps quite a lot. So on iNaturalist, we can meet the experts. There's various specialist scientists on iNaturalist. Here we have some samples. We have Greg Laisley, R.J. Adams, Jason Sinkhurst, and Susan Hewitt. They have made various amounts of observations and identifications. And they also have become curators for iNaturalist, which helps to bring in new species to areas or confirm different Saskatchewan Conservation Data Center classification or classifications from NatureServe, and they just help iNaturalist run smoothly. So it's very easy to use iNaturalist. You download it, you find wildlife, you take a photo. It can be any wild plant, insect, mushroom, animal, or fungi, and it can be any other evidence of life, as we mentioned: shells, scat, fur, tracks, feathers, and nests found in your neighborhood, your home, backyard, farm, or even through your windows. And you might be surprised at how many insects thrive in the nooks and crannies around you. How does iNaturalist work on your smartphone? Your images show up here, and say if you're at a plant and you take one picture of the same plant, you can click the plus sign, stay at the same organism, and take a picture of the leaf. And then click the plus sign again and take a picture of the underside of the leaf. And keep going until you have as many pictures as you think you need for the organism. You can click on what did you see, and then the computer vision technology will bring up another screen. If you don't agree with the computer vision technology, you can add in whether you think it's a plant, animal, bird, mammal, a winged or once-winged insect, a butterfly, or a moth, and just leave it at a larger taxonomic classification. As you're in the field, iNaturalist will add the date and time and also the GPS location. It will put in the geoprivacy, and the captive or cultivated fields are ones that you can change. If you're on an Android, you would save your observation at the top of the screen, and on the iPhone, you would press the green bar at the bottom and push share for your organism, and then you could move on to the next organism. So it's very easy to use. 1, 2, 3, you snap a picture, you share it online, and then the identification process begins. So it's a great way to save species with crowdsourcing. So sometimes there might be the feeling that I'm not a botanist, I'm not an entomologist, I'm not another specialist scientist, and I don't want to look like a dummy. And that's where iNaturalist comes to the rescue. The computer vision image recognition technology, even if it's an image like this, the other images came up straight to thistles. This one comes up to the tribe and the subtribe, and it also provides some species level suggestions. And once again, you can click the link view. And if you're not even sure it's a thistle, you can just, again, we know it does looks like a plant, and here we know this one looks like a flowering plant. So if you're more comfortable typing that in, that is just fine as well. So all taxa is attached to a single tree on iNaturalist. These are the general identifications at the kingdom level. So if you write down that you think that the organism you see might be a mammal, it might bring along the zoologist and the animal biologist. The reptiles, observations would bring along the herpers. And then we have quite a few other specialist scientists that can help out with identifications of the organism that you have uploaded to iNaturalist. And this listing of specialist scientists are by no means all the specialist scientists worldwide. In biophysical terms, biodiversity has never been moving faster nor further from sustainability than it is now, Gretchen C. Daly, biodiversity expert from Stanford University, said. And it's not incremental over the next 40 years. It's right now that we need to move, said Paul Ralph Ehrlich, a biologist, best known for his warnings about the consequences of population growth and limited resources. So when you're on iNaturalist, there have been projects created. So it's handy to join the Saskatchewan Conservation Data Center, and there will be a question popping up. Do you want to share your organisms with the Saskatchewan Conservation Data Center, and do you want to allow the SCDC to place your organism into the SCDC project page? And that's a very good idea. For in this case, if your organism that you took a picture of was of Harris's sparrow, it's a species at risk, one that the Saskatchewan Conservation Data Center would like to know the date and the location of in Saskatchewan. Another important project to join is the Imap Invasives Saskatchewan project. If you took a picture of this one, the common toadflax, an invasive species, it also alerts the Imap Invasives project of the date and the location for invasive species coming into Saskatchewan. Other project pages specific to our area might be fungi of Saskatchewan, Lepidoptera of Saskatchewan, snakes, dragonflies or damselflies of the Odonata family, ferns of Saskatchewan, and bird eggs of Saskatchewan. These are amazing projects. We also have sort of a private group, the Saskatchewan Plant Community for the Ecology Lab. And that's a very interesting one to observe about what they are looking for and what they are studying these days. This one here, the Woodland Skipper, happens to be another species at risk in Saskatchewan. So are you having troubles getting your observations identified and that's why you have come to iNaturalist? It's a great idea to pop into iNaturalist on your computer, press the edit, and then reorder your photographs. Only the top photo is recognized by the iNaturalist computer vision technology, and the identifiers use the other photos that we were asking for. So if you reorder your photo, say if you saw a butterfly way over there, and then you start taking a few footsteps closer and a few footsteps closer, and it hasn't flown away yet, then maybe your third or fourth picture are much clearer. And so if you reorder your photographs, you give iNaturalist a better chance of observing it. Because if the organism takes up 70% of the screen, like you are very close to it, it has a much better chance of identification. The other hint is when you're out in the field and you see a very delicate native grass species and you've got the seed head, it's a nice idea to put your hand in behind the grass species, because if you hold it up in front of the bushes, which are also green, your little native grass species might disappear in the green. So putting your sleeve, a pant leg behind the species you're taking a picture of might help the computer vision a little bit better for the chance of identification. Another handy tool is to download the SCDC species list we've already talked about. And if on iNaturalist, you've already received an identification to genus level, and you look it up on the species list, and you see that there's only 4 species in that genus. And for your insect, which is reddish, there are 3 insect species that you've seen in the taxonomy list or on a Google search. 3 of them are tan colored and only 1 is reddish. The indication that your species, which is also reddish, might be that particular species. And so you could either put that in the comments field if you're not a specialist scientist or if you're not positive, or you could make that species identification and you could say why. Quite often when you go to genus level or species level on iNaturalist, it's handy to say why. And the other thing is to place something in your photo for scale. If you don't carry around a tape measure in your pocket, then just reach in your pocket and see if you have a nickel or a quarter, or just put your hand, because say if you're taking a picture of something like scat, you might not be able to tell if it's moose or deer without something in the picture for scat from a photograph. So take lots and lots of pictures wherever possible of the same organism from different angles, and it will help a lot. Now, this is the geoprivacy aspect that we were talking about. Gretchen C. Daly, a biodiversity expert from Stanford University, says, nature is often just seen as kind of in the way of prosperity. And what we're saying is that nature is crucial to our prosperity. And that was reported in the Washington Post. So the default on iNaturalist is open, and you can see that it comes to a very small area. The obscured selection for geoprivacy sets it to about 150 square miles, and you can make things totally private. The thing to remember when you think you should use the geoprivacy function on iNaturalist is if you're out on a BioBlitz that lasted an hour, or just walking in a park, and you've taken 10 observation pictures, it's good to, if you find that the middle one has species at risk designation, set your whole walk to the same geoprivacy, because it might be easy to deduct, oh, that middle one was right beside this other plant. I bet you that species at risk is here, and then it could be harvested or poached. And if you are taking a picture of plants on your own land or at your own house, and you don't really want people to know where you live, you can set your location to private, and you don't have to have it as open. So going back to project pages, we were advised by the City of Saskatoon and Meewasin that a great way to support the master plan for the urban regional parks, which are about 470 acres, would be to do an iNaturalist assessment to support the professional ecological assessment. And to date, invasive species have been found and removed, and then about 24 species at risk have been found and identified, either through eBird or iNaturalist, which provides documented proof about the species at risk that rely on the habitats, which are quite unique in the afforestation areas because it's a mixed biome. It's being an afforested area, it's trees planted where there have been none before. And so we've got the moist mixed grasslands, of course, taking over the area, but we've got the woodlands. So we've got the mixed woodlands of the acidic evergreen trees as well as the deciduous trees, providing some very unique habitats close to the habitats of the northern boreal forests. And so some species, such as that little butterfly, the woodlands butterfly, finds itself right at home in the afforestation areas. Now, the Saskatoon afforestation areas are located on the very southwest edge of town. George General Park is 148 acres, and Richard St. Barbe Baker afforestation area is 346. And they're just located right by the Pike Lake Highway and near the CNR Chapel Yards. And the west swale is actually remnants of the Urath Island glacial spillway from the Pleistocene area, which at one time connected the glacial North Saskatchewan with the glacial South Saskatchewan. And nowadays that wouldn't happen because we know our North Saskatchewan water basin and the South Saskatchewan water basin drain in two different ways. So it's really a great endeavor to learn more about our geology of the area, to learn about our glacial spillways and the west swale. So iNaturalist is a great tool, as we've been saying, for specialist scientists. And here we have Nick Bellevue from Saskatchewan working on his master's on the starvation prickly pear cactus in Saskatchewan and documenting the floral visitors. So he might register how many species there are of the floral visitors and the pollinators to the starvation prickly pear, how the population of the prickly pear cactus is making out, and different things by using the iNaturalist records on iNaturalist. And he put a call out to some Saskatchewan observers to help him out with his project. The Canadian Wildlife Federation wrote a report about science in action. A random find on iNaturalist leads to a huge discovery. So this is where taking pictures of evidence of organisms is extremely valuable. In southern Quebec, someone took a picture of a leaf that only showed this wiggly pattern. And specialist scientists got very, very excited, thinking that it might be a European species and therefore invasive in North America. And they consulted and collaborated with other specialist scientists, and sure enough, it was determined that it was the elm zigzag sawfly making its way into southern Quebec. And so whenever a person takes a photo of a leaf showing evidence of an insect and posts it to iNaturalist, it can lead to a huge discovery, as well as taking a picture of the organism itself. And here we see that Susan Hewitt, a citizen scientist, a malacologist, and iNaturalist observer, co-authored a scientific paper in 2017, initiating again early detection and rapid response, EDRR, to an invasive species. In this case, it was this plant, the Italian lords and ladies, and it was found in New York, and action could be taken through iNaturalist. Here is a picture taken by 10-year-old Sam in Texas. He was out using iNaturalist and took a picture of a pretty green beetle on his driveway. This was later seen by Sam Kiesnick, a Texas park and wildlife biologist who was doing identifications on iNaturalist, who got corroboration from other specialists. Could it be that the beetle seen on the driveway, could it be the emerald ash borer finding its way from Europe to Texas? Now, if you happen to have a beautiful ash tree, there are treatments for trees to protect them should you be worried about the emerald ash borer. However, to date, according to various specialist scientists as well as terrain maps on iNaturalist, the emerald ash borer seems to be in the area around Texas as well. There was a species of emerald ash borer found in Texas, thought to be coming in with a shipment on a pallet to Detroit, and it was not until that the beetle made its way into Windsor, Ontario, that it was discovered. And so we do have the emerald ash borer in eastern Canada. This actually placed the ash trees on the IUCN Red List. This listing is a crucial first step in plant conservation. It helps us to prioritize which species we need to conserve through preserving their seeds in different areas, growing them in places like botanical gardens, using them in restoration projects, or working with local governments to protect the land on which they grow. Now here is the David Suzuki Foundation Bimbi project. Their goal was to help find endangered and prevalent butterflies and better understand their relationship with native plants. So these are some species of the top endangered species that they found when they were embarking on their Bimbi project. They found the Mormon metalmark, the West Coast lady, and the juniper hairstreak. So it was all very exciting. So we've had some sponsors we want to thank to support us on our City Nature Challenge, Eco-Friendly, SaskTel, SaskPower, and Sask Energy. We're proud to sponsor the City Nature Challenge for Saskatoon, as well as Mosaic. And we have some hosts that were promising to do some wonderful bio blitzes for the City Nature Challenge. We've got the Meewasin and the City Nature Conservancy of Canada and CPAWS. The City of Saskatoon also was a sponsor, and they've also provided some support to the City Nature Challenge. Their entomologist is going to be at a webinar both before City Nature Challenge and afterwards to help everybody learn more about insects and pests in their area. So anybody can sign up and ask any insect-related question. And after the City Nature Challenge, because she had her education in both insects and in native plants and pollinator species, she will do another session on plants after the City Nature Challenge if you'd like some help having your plants identified. And again, once anybody can join into those sessions. And the Mycological Society Working Group will be presenting a webinar about fungi and lichen before the City Nature Challenge and after. You just have to look at the friends.area's webpage or our Eventbrite page to find out how to get enrolled in those coming events. So the Saskatoon and Area City Nature Challenge includes areas around the City of Saskatoon, and it has some green space public parks, such as these ones. So out of these ones, you might have a favorite, or you might see one on this list you've never visited before that you want to give it a try. We are basically right now encouraging people to use their own property or a green space park, public space in which to do their observations and not to trespass. In the City of Saskatoon and Area, the City of Saskatoon helped to identify some of the larger park spaces where native species might be found. There are also, of course, pocket parks and your own front and backyards where you might, of course, see wild species like insects and bugs coming to help out your planted garden and grass and in your tree in your front of your yard. The City Nature Challenge is a worldwide event. And in Saskatchewan, we're having a mini challenge. Regina and Area, YQR CNC is competing against Saskatoon and Area, CNC YXE, in a fun challenge, kind of like how you might cheer on the Hilltops or the Regina Rams. And so if you're ever in southern Saskatchewan, join up to the Regina and Area City Nature Challenge. And if you're in Saskatoon and Area, join into theirs and provide some observations. We're trying to get more cities around the province to sign up. So if you know of anybody that lives around the other cities in Saskatchewan and you'd like to have more information about how their city can get involved, just reach out to us and we'll put you in contact with the Canadian Wildlife Federation, who helps to set people up on the City Nature Challenge for Canada. So for cities not registered this year, there is a way to be involved. So if you live near Lloydminster or near Swift Current or any other place in Saskatchewan that's not within the Regina or the Saskatoon boundaries, then sign up to the City Nature Challenge 2022 Global Project. For the other projects, Regina and Saskatoon, you don't have to register with the project page, but for this one, for the Global Project, you do have to register because it is the worldwide one. So we wish to thank you for your time today, and we also want to thank the work of the Saskatchewan Prairie Conservation Action Plan and their partners for the amazing work that they do to promote and conserve Saskatchewan's native prairie. It has been an honor to share the City Nature Challenge and the power within the tool iNaturalist with all the partners here today. What became abundantly clear in the Status of Pollinators in North America report is that native pollinators, such as bumblebees, flies, wasps, beetles, bats, all need monitoring. Contribution from citizen science programs such as iNaturalist, guide assessments, trends, and regional environmental causes. So once again, April 29th to May 2nd is the observation stage. If you're not really sure about how to use iNaturalist, if you go to one of our web pages, we put a webinar on YouTube called What Is It? To help you out with observations. The May 3rd to May 8th is the identification stage. And once again, we have a webinar on YouTube about how anybody can become an identifier. You don't have to be a botanist. You don't have to know taxonomic keys. And we tell you how to become an identifier to help interact the organisms with specialist scientists. And then on May 9th, the winner for the City Nature Challenge all around the world is announced. Thank you for your time today. Are there any questions?
First of all, thank you so much for sharing your passion and enthusiasm for nature and pollinators. It's very contagious. We do have a couple questions from our attendees, and to our attendees, if you still have any questions, feel free to type it in now. The first question is, with iNaturalist, how does a data entry get upgraded to research grade?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, basically what you need is 2 out of 3 identifiers concurring that is the species level. So sometimes an organism might have up to 10 people having a discussion about the organism, and sometimes it happens right away. And it can actually even go out of research level, research grade. So say if 2 out of 3 people agreed and went to research grade, and then someone comes along later and says, whoa, hold the bus, this doesn't look like that species at all. This is the reason why. And it can come out of research grade. So yeah, so all you need is 2 identifiers concurring that it is that species.
Okay, and what kind of timeline are we looking at for an entry to be upgraded to research grade?
That also varies. We find that observations such as fungi or insects, they're more challenging. The number of species in the insect taxon are huge and numerous. And so the amount of specialist scientists that know how to take an insect to species grade are a little bit challenging, few and far between and challenging. And the other thing with insects, sometimes they stay at genus level because sometimes you need to put insects under a microscope for the identification to species level. And with fungi, there just hasn't been enough people taking pictures on the citizen science platforms or specialist scientists available to get enough documentation about fungi, because where we might have a picture book of plants and animals, and most people, as they grow up, they know how to identify deers and elephants and rhinoceroses and birds and come to a taxon level or even some family levels fairly easily. Nobody's done that with fungi and mushrooms. So the amount of specialist scientists for mushrooms is very few and far between again. So those ones, the time to get to research grade would be probably a little bit longer, unless it happens to be a mushroom such as a puffball mushroom, or maybe a conch or a polypore. And with insect, if it is a common one or one that we're actually highlighted for our observation, like a monarch butterfly, they might come to an identification sooner. And it also depends on the area. Like if it's an area with high biodiversity, you actually need more observations on iNaturalist and more specialist scientists. Whereas if it's an area with less biodiversity, like perhaps a desert type of area, there it might come to species level a little bit sooner. So it's not ever clear cut about how soon it comes to species level. In Saskatchewan, we're in a kind of a unique situation having winter times, because a lot of our observations occur between spring and fall, and not as many observations occur when everything's in its winter stage or for forensic identification. So quite often the specialist scientists can get all the Saskatchewan observations caught up over the winter months, which is very handy, that you pretty much know that being in Saskatchewan and having winters does help you to know what you've seen. So if you do want your observation, if you have a necessity for your organism to come to research grade sooner, click on what iNaturalist suggests for genus or species level. And when you go to that page on iNaturalist, it tells you who the top identifiers for that species is. And you can, on your observation, write a message to them and write the sign the @ sign before their name, and say, would you be able to help with my identification of this observation? I see you're the top identifier of this species, and I'd like some help. And that would be another way. Thank you.
Cool. That's awesome. That's great. How does one become a top identifier there? Is it like a volunteer thing that people just earn, or are people paid to be part of iNaturalist?
There are some staff for iNaturalist, maybe some of the curators. The observers and the identifiers are basically all citizen scientists doing it just because they have a love of nature and a love of doing observations or identifications. Something, if you're not a specialist scientist and you want to break into the field of, the more you partake in iNaturalist, the more you learn and the more you know. So to become an identifier and not be a botanist or not know a taxonomic key, putting an unknown, sometimes an observation will go to an unknown status for various reasons, and flipping an unknown to an identification of a plant, a flowering plant, a dragonfly is enormously helpful, because a specialist scientist that focuses on dragonflies or focuses in on different forms of taxonomy, they don't have time. Like if it's an unknown, they don't have time to go into all the unknowns. So just having citizen scientists going in and looking at identifications and saying, hey, that looks like a mushroom, I'm going to call it a fungi and a lichen in the taxonomic key, and that will call in the specialist scientists that want to talk about mushrooms, and so forth and so on. So sometimes becoming a top identifier with the number of counts is one way. Becoming an identifier for that species level, you would have to make a number of observations of that particular species. And people can kind of also see when you click on their profile page on iNaturalist if they've had, if they are a botanist or written research articles for that particular species. And that's also very helpful, because quite often the specialist scientists we'll make a link to their research papers and also other hints and tips about how to identify that particular one. There's somebody that does beetles on iNaturalist, and he has a whole bunch of hints and tips about how to make your life easier if you've uploaded an observation of a beetle, and so forth and so on. So it's a very helpful community.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. Well, I think that's all the time that we have for today, but I really wanted to thank you again for sharing your wealth of information. You're very, very knowledgeable, and your passion is really contagious. I can't wait for the snow to melt and to
For
get
sure.
outside and start using iNaturalist. So thank you
Yeah,
very
that's right.
much.
Cool.
Uh,
Thank you.
to all of our listeners out there, thank you so much for catching today's webinar. Check us out on May 3rd for a webinar about bobolinks. So with that, I'd like to say thank you very much, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.